So one of the big issues with Bitcoin, I think really fundamental long-term one, is how fundamentally the proof of work security that Bitcoin depends on, it's made possible by custom hardware. So your TSMC, your Global Foundries, your Intel, they're the people who actually make the chips that go into ASICs. And ultimately, one kind of scorched earth strategy is just to go to these people and say, look, stop making Bitcoin mining hardware, or license your hardware and only make it available to certain approved people, or, build in kill features in it. And, there's a good example of something that's very hard to prevent. People talk about proof of stake, but it looks like it's fundamentally less sound than, say, Bitcoin. It just can't provide the kind of security guarantees. That was kind of one of the things I touched on anyway in my talk.
So proof of stake, you're skeptical of the security that proof of stake can provide?
Yeah, the issue with proof of stake versus proof of work is proof of stake, you can think of it as what it proves is that a group of people came to consensus that a certain timeline is acceptable. The problem is it does not prove anything that's only the one they did. So proof of stake systems suffer from the nothing at stake problem, where nothing stops the people with signing authority from creating an alternate version of history with completely different, say, transactions that get in. And it's even worse than that, because going back in time, suppose a bunch of keys get compromised, say, 3 years back. You can rewrite the proof of stake blockchain from 3 years back by making use of these old keys. Now, in practice, what happens? Well, proof of stake systems inevitably just centralize. They have central authority who goes and signs what is valid history, what isn't valid history. And it may be in practice that's decentralized enough so that we can use social methods to really come to consensus. And if one central authority misbehaves, we'll switch to another central authority. And the time scales where this has to happen may be long enough that it doesn't matter. But, that's obviously a much less pure way of achieving consensus than proof of work.
How do you know how centralized a proof of stake cryptocurrency is? As far as you're looking at the blockchain, it could be, I'm not sure.
Yeah, in a pure system, just like proof of work, you can only get evidence it is not centralized. Or in a proof of stake in proof of work system, you can only get evidence the system is centralized. You can't get evidence that it isn't. And this is really because one person can pretend to be multiple people. So those multiple people who you believe decentralized power could very well be controlled by one entity.
Talk a little bit about the zero confirmation, double spend, and the possible attacks to retailers or anybody else that, ATMs that rely on zero confirmation trust.
So essentially right now, Bitcoin nodes, they only accept the first transaction they see to the mempool. And if they accept into the mempool, if the Bitcoin node's run by a miner, that means they'll mine blocks with that transaction in there. And if someone creates another transaction that double spends the first transaction, spends the same outputs but to a different destination, that second transaction gets rejected. Of course, in a decentralized system, what's first and what's second depends on what node. One node might see one transaction first, another node might see a different transaction first. And the blockchain, via proof of work, is what determines what is first and what's second. So when you go send someone money in Bitcoin, and you make the assumption that your transaction will be the one that, I should say that when you send money to someone in Bitcoin, and the receiver makes the assumption that the transaction they got is definitely the one that's going to end up in the blockchain, they're really making an assumption based on a principle that Bitcoin itself isn't designed to solve. Bitcoin only makes transactions guaranteed to confirm by confirmations, by appearing in blocks. If you're just trusting based on what nodes around the network happen to have, you're actually trusting a whole lot of people to do something in a specific way. Even worse than that, it's often against their own incentives. If the second transaction from the perspective of a node pays a lot more money in fees, then why shouldn't the miner mine transaction number 2 instead of transaction number 1? It's economically rational for them to mine it, and there's no downsides to mining a double spend. And there's also the issue that if we rely on this system, when it breaks, the solutions that often get proposed at the mining level are very centralized solutions. As an example, Mike Hearn proposed the idea that miners should be able to vote to steal other miners' block rewards. So if I find a block and other miners think that it included a double spend, those other miners should be able to vote, and if they achieve a majority, they get to reassign my bitcoins to someone else. Of course, the technical implementation is just simply I can go vote to go and reassign another person's bitcoins, and equally, from my perspective, the guy who mined a double spend, I may have no way of knowing that it was double spend, because everything's relative. If I see one transaction first, and then I see another one, I don't know what order other people saw them in. I can't. So the only way I could really guarantee that is to start going off to other miners and creating a central authority on what transaction came first. I'm sure this is what would happen if that got implemented, and one of the things I'm working on to try to stop that, stop us going in those very harmful directions, is to go the other direction. Implement what's called replace by fee. Simply whatever transaction pays you the most money as a miner is the one you should include. And that makes it very clear that unconfirmed transactions aren't secure, and it forces the entire ecosystem to have better solutions. I went and wrote my first version of those tools maybe, I think last August or so, and released them. I also released some tools to do double spending. In that case, I took advantage of other techniques to exploit that not everyone sees the same transaction at the same time. And very quickly, some people lost a fair bit of money, and it seems to be that the market's reacted by not depending on unconfirmed transactions. Currently, very few people depend on them. Occasional ATM does for small amounts of money. There's some person-to-person stuff that does, but for the most part, companies go wait for confirmation. For instance, when you go buy something that's going to be shipped to you, they'll wait for confirmation before actually giving the package to FedEx. They may go tell you, yeah, you've paid instantly, but they're not actually going to send you the product until then.
So, is this zero confirmation, it's not a big problem right now, right? Like a lot of ATMs are just, how did the ATMs deal with this problem of people wanting cash instantly now?
Well, a lot of them will not give you cash instantly. That's the way they've solved it, and they've had to solve this because ATM operators have lost a lot of money from accepting unconfirmed transactions. The reality is you can't assume they will confirm. Experience has shown that to be true. Some ATM operators have lost 5 figures worth of money from this before they learned that, this isn't guarantee Bitcoin can provide. And currently, if you go to one of those operators, either A, they'll make it, take advantage of the fact that they know your identity in some way. Maybe they have cameras, maybe they have your phone number, maybe you've been forced to show identification. So that if you double spend, there's a risk of legal threats. And also B, a lot of them, and probably basically all of them for large amounts, when you deposit a large amount of Bitcoins into the ATM, it just forces you to wait for confirmation. I've used one myself where it spits out a receipt, you get a little code, and you go back 10 minutes later when transaction's confirmed, you type in the code and you get your money.
Now, one of the arguments against altcoins and all the the 800 plus competitors that are behind Bitcoin is that Bitcoin can integrate any major innovation that they come up with. However, block time seems to be one of those more difficult ones to implement. Is it possible that this is an opening in competition for faster confirmation altcoins to come and try to serve the ATM market?
I think faster confirmations is a pretty silly thing to be doing because, confirmation time is a trade-off between security of your coin and also convenience. And the altcoins that, you know, try to push this down, say 1 minute, 30 seconds, they're making their coins much less secure, because it now means that if you're a mining pool with more hashing power, you earn proportionally more money than if you're a smaller pool. And that difference becomes more and more extreme as the block interval gets smaller and smaller, and your proximity to other miners as well as your size becomes more and more important for your profitability. You know, 10 minutes is a very conservative number, and equally like 1 minute. 1 minute's still a pretty long time to wait for most applications. You know, if I'm trying to go pay in Bitcoins for a donut, the cashier wants me to get out of there in like 5 seconds. They don't want to wait that long. Yet 5 seconds will never be something Bitcoin can guarantee, or any system like it.
Did you hear about Darkcoin's instant transactions? They revealed this sort of feature recently. It seems very much geared towards retail services and stopping the double step and no confirmation problems.
Guarantee you Darkcoin's instant transaction is going to get broken sometime. You know, we're not going to see it, probably because no one actually uses it. But you just can't have a decentralized system that comes to consensus that fast. You know, it's not going to happen. You can have systems that punish people after the fact for a double spend. You know, I've often talked about one myself called replaced by fee scorched earth, which is the notion that if someone double spends you, the moment you detect it, you spend the Bitcoins they sent you, all the transaction fees, and you're essentially saying, fuck you, don't try to screw me over, I'm going to destroy this money so that you do not end up having a reason to do this, and potentially I destroy, say, a security bond you put up as well, you know, to further punish you. It's not guaranteed that this will happen, but probabilistically it discourages you from doing things, because economically you're not going to make more money by trying to double spend than just behaving honestly.
Is there a way to prove a double spend outside of, like, only looking at the blockchain or only looking at decentralized data, or do you need to sort of...
You can easily prove that someone created a double spend, but you can't prove intent. And one of the things is, often creating double spends is actually a very natural thing to do. You know, if you have a transaction that takes a long time to confirm, you can double spend it with another transaction that pays higher fees. You know, if you do 10 transactions in a row, you can keep double spending the first one and add more inputs to it and more outputs. You know, there's all sorts of reasons to go modify transactions after the fact. It's, you know, the question is, why did you do that and what's the effect? In many cases, there is no harmful effect. So, I mean, I'd stress the problem replaced by fee solves is a bigger issue than a problem with Bitcoin directly. It's more of a problem of how people use Bitcoin and where it may develop in the future. Replaced by fee is really saying, use Bitcoin in a way that's secure in a decentralized system. You know, that's secure without trusting people across an entire network. Now, you may choose to, as an individual, secure transactions from double spends by using central authorities between two parties that they've chosen to use, but you get to go choose that party. You're not blindly trusting everyone on the network like the current unconfirmed transaction system works. And equally, you don't create incentives for people to try to centralize the network. You know, and really I see this as a pragmatic thing, where by encouraging replaced by fee, we ensure that Bitcoin evolves towards a better system in the future, rather than evolving essentially by panics to a more centralized system to try to provide guarantees that a decentralized system can't provide.